All right, so this is Todd Atkins and Miguel Adorati, MMA Conspiracy Hour and MMA Collector YouTube channel, which is MMA Collector 74. That's where you can find Miguel and the MMA Museum podcast. And as always, before we start, we have a sponsor here, Live to Fight Design. Use my promo code Todd Atkins. You can get $20 off a fight banner or a gym banner. And I have some news about a new sponsor that we will have next week, so be on the lookout for that. And Miguel, we're going to kind of start with the UFC 296 stories coming out of there. We aren't going to go down all the fights like most shows do. We kind of stick to kind of some of the main stories. So I kind of want to start with the Covington and Edwards. I think the big story coming out of that was one that Colby really didn't look all that impressive at all. And Edwards, I think, kind of came out not really as a champion, really showing an impressive showing, but not looking as bad as Covington did.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, even with the champions, if everything's going smoothly and the machine's running, they say that they should fight every 6 weeks, right? Or I'm sorry, every 6 months, right? 6 months for buildup and stuff like that, twice a year. That's what you want to see these guys. And both these guys are way off on that. Leon Edwards is a champion, a sitting champion, has sat for 9 months. And I would have preferred to see, and I'm sure Leon would have preferred to see, we're going to go by the 6 month, why not sneak one in at 5 months, shorten that up a little bit, not extend it 3 more months. So, you could chalk up ring rust or whatever. You're right. It wasn't an impressive performance. He did enough to win his title or to keep his title. And, with Colby, you're talking about a guy who's been out for about 21 months since the Masvidal fight. And it's been a tumultuous 21 months for him too, if you follow some of his social media and stuff, he's been enjoying himself at times. And again, without a fight, he should be, if he's, in the ballpark, he should also be fighting twice a year. You could argue he should be fighting 3 times a year because he's lower on the totem pole than the champions, right? So to have him sitting 21 months is, you're actually not living up to what the fighters would want. It seems to be like it's the UFC is like, every fighter is going to ask to fight, especially if they're healthy. Hey, I want to fight. Yeah, but and there's a reason. And anytime the UFC is making up reasons for healthy fighters why they can't fight or why their fight is being pushed back, that's something that's questionable. I wonder. So yeah, they went with a main event of guys that, Covington's a few years, removed from when he was the hype, and Edwards, is a guy I don't think they've ever really loved. So yeah, they went with the main event for lack of a better main event in their own eyes. And they get what they get, those guys. I don't think Edwards is feeling the love from the UFC like a champion should. It's just my opinion. But, if you're not sending him in there completely 100% focused on the fight and there's other worries like, oh, I've been off 9 months, not 6, then you get what you get. It's not perfect management.
Now, I want to ask you about this. Donald Trump was at the event. He did leave during Covington's post-fight, interview. And Dana White did make it a point to say during the press conference, that Donald Trump wouldn't have put the belt on Colby had he won. Is that kind of a sign that Colby's done? Dana White did say he looked old and slow. It was almost like Dana was kind of distancing himself from Covington in a way.
It's kind of sad for Colby because, at the end of the day, he probably is reasonably well paid for the landscape right now. But at the end of the day, I don't think he broke into the huge money. And now he's being discarded, maybe. Yeah, Colby had appeared with Trump. They, all 3 of them have that Republican righty, image and stuff like that. So it's not surprising. You know, getting Trump at the event is, you know, on par with it. You know, I'm waiting for Trump to announce that Dana's going to be his vice president.
That could be possible.
You know, we're going to talk about PR and PR later. That's how my mind works. It's like, yeah, Dana is probably not the right guy, but you know, we'll see.
You think there's more to him appearing with them all the time?
Um, you know, I don't think it's easy to get on Trump's radar. You know what I mean? Because he's so inundated with a life that's beyond what, you know, me and you can normally imagine. You know what I mean? But the fact that he reserves time for Dana and stuff like that, I think is interesting, and I think is cost Dana some collateral. Like Dana tries to be associated with him because I think he thinks that way. I think they're birds of a feather. You know what I mean?
It is interesting that they make it a point to walk out together.
Mm-hmm.
You may be onto something.
Who's that good for? Trump was going to run for president and being seen with a guy that, you know, is the fight business, a manly man, this, that, you know, whatever, or Dana as the owner of this company attracting a guy who's a, you know, presidents at fights, you know, goes back to the days of
Mm-hmm.
Theodore Roosevelt, not FDR. In 1910,
Mm-hmm.
the guy who was governor of New York first, and he trained boxing in the White House. So the attention of a president is not bad for the fight game, or an ex-president, or a future president, whatever, however you want to quantify this guy. But and I think, you know, Dana's all in. It's like, you know, Dana, he may chirp or harp at people, but there's no doubt that Dana's voting Trump, right? So yeah, I think that it's interesting the way their PR machine works, and it's at what level does it work? Because now you're into, you know, that's world level stuff attracting him at this point. You know,
Right.
the PFL didn't even have Ngannou at their own event last time.
That's a good point. All right, so let's go to the next topic. I think maybe the next story we should touch on is, you know, the Pimblett Ferguson story. I think there's a few things that are interesting here. You know, obviously Tony didn't look good, and I wouldn't say Pimblett looked great either necessarily. I mean, he couldn't finish Ferguson. He did, you know, he dominated the fight, much like Leon Edwards did, but I wouldn't say it's what probably the UFC would have wanted from Pimblett, you know, if they were hoping to kind of push him forward after his last performance. But you know, your thoughts on that? Where Ferguson, obviously, he didn't show that he was had more left, and Pimblett really wasn't necessarily at all impressive either.
It's a rough way to go out for Tony Ferguson. You know, for a guy that, you know, you take the clock back, I don't know what it is at this point, 10 years or whatever, that was probably a top 5 pound for pound guy. I mean, just an eclectic, fantastic, and I think he's got a UFC winning streak to back it up. That just wound up with the Khabib fight always falling apart, always falling apart. But you're talking about a guy who at one point people thought he's your best shot at beating Khabib. So to go out against Paddy Pimblett, the UFC milked that for all it was worth. They got what they needed out of him, and now they've discarded him. And it's a, you know, a tribute to the way they do things, or, you know, a shadow on the way they do things, that, you know, they put him in with Pimblett, a guy that, you know, they had a rate that Pimblett was going to be enough to beat him, that he had fallen that far. And then, you know, Pimblett's a guy that they've been pushing in you know, putting in positions Pimblett not a main card fighter. It's as simple as that. Pimblett's not a main card fighter.
You don't think so? I mean, he has a big following.
No, if that's how you judge things,
you're going off his talent, is what you mean.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Following wise, he is, I would say, but
no. Following wise, he is, and talking.
Okay.
And I know we're going to go talk about Chael here, and this is where that fine line of like getting your WWE mic work together, get you noticed and stuff like that, and everybody's got to do what they got to do. Not everybody can do the presence that Pimblett has. Pimblett does have charisma when he's talking. You like him or you hate him, but he strikes a chord one way or another. So I'm not saying that that's all bad. I'm just saying that, in true matchmaking, in true sport, he eventually, and Ferguson 10 years ago would certainly have been the guy. He's eventually going to write a check he can't cash. He's going to be put in with somebody that he cannot beat. And Ferguson has fallen far enough that, it's a shame. It's just a shame because you're talking about a guy that really was an elite fighter at his highest point. He never got a title shot, and the Khabib thing and this and that. And then he was kind of, for lack of a better word, he marched to the beat of his own drum kind of thing. Like when, injures his knee and rehabs, a rehab that takes fighters 6 to 9 months, he does in 4, like, doing exercise at home kind of shit. So, I don't know why the UFC never pushed him. I think he was a top level guy at one point. And to see him go out like this is kind of sad to me.
Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about David Goggins. Tony brings him in. David Goggins is obviously a Navy SEAL, and on social media has a huge following as a motivator, as kind of a over the top character, with his jogs, his motivating jogs, and yelling at the camera and that kind of thing. He's been on Joe Rogan, and he's on a lot of podcasts as being, kind of a motivator. So Tony brings him in, and he's trying to motivate Tony, through training him, and also, when he's there at the event, he brings him into his corner trying to motivate him. Do you think that comes off bad for him because Tony really didn't have anything left? He's down there getting hit by Pimblett. He can't get up, and he can't will him to do better.
No, I think he's a social media star, and he's got his following and stuff like that. I'm sure that came on the basis of some successes.
Yeah,
and I think here he was under more scrutiny and more eyes were on him than have ever been on him before. And you're right. I think he came up a little bit short. So maybe it doesn't make him any new fans, but I think he's going to be okay. Ferguson, bringing him aboard, look, some of these guys don't need cornermen anymore. You know what I mean? And Ferguson's been around enough, and he was looking for something that motivated him, and it didn't work out. Or maybe his body just couldn't do it anymore. So yeah, unfortunately, out of the two, I think that Ferguson's probably worse off than this David Scoggins or whatever his name is going to be. Although, like I said, I don't think he got the million new likes and followers that he expected, for, motivating him to a win in the 3rd round or whatever would have done for him. But c'est la vie. What would be interesting to me is that, like, he's a Marine and stuff like that. Again, we talked about Trump and Dana and the image and stuff like that. I wonder what would happen if I chose to license Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner, whatever, as a cornerman for myself. If I were a UFC fighter, you know what I mean? It's like against the image and stuff like that. I think David Scoggins was maybe approved by the company.
No, Goggins, David Goggins.
Whatever his name is. Yeah, it's good for him.
But what do you think about kind of the? Because I think it was a publicity stunt for both of them in a way.
That's what
So
I mean.
yeah,
And approved by the company. You don't show up as a corner man, pay for a license and this, that, or the other thing without the UFC knowing and saying, okay, that's okay. That's
yeah.
why, the ridiculousness of Bruce Jenner and stuff like that, or Caitlyn or whatever. The point is the UFC is vigilant over all of that. So yeah, this was nothing more than just a publicity stunt.
What do you think about?
It's the same thing as the CM Punk publicity stunt, which we talked about last podcast. And briefly, I will sum it up for you. The UFC will do things like this because their downside, they don't suffer. Tony Ferguson might, David Goggins might, but they don't suffer. They just put it on. With CM Punk falling apart like that, it wasn't like people were like the UFC's a farce. So they proved the point that maybe lower weight class athletes shouldn't even try this, in that world and stuff like that. So they got their, and that's the way this is, It does no harm to the UFC, so they're okay with it. They don't want just anybody in the corner either. So this guy's got enough followers, this, that, the other thing. It's like, yeah, put him on there.
Now, I wanted to go into kind of like our third topic, which was Duplessis and Sean Strickland. They're supposed to fight in the next main event. They were part of this where they have kind of like the guys who are going to be in the next event as part of the press conference. And there was, a lot of negative back and forth, with Strickland kind of calling Duplessis gay and Duplessis bringing up Strickland's, dad beating him as a child and stuff like that. And it looked like Strickland took that pretty personally, and and this is where we kind of get into the conspiracy stuff. UFC sits them right behind each other. Like I think Duplessis was one row behind him, not directly behind him, but the next row behind Strickland. So as soon as they put the camera on them at the event, you got Strickland there, Duplessis. They see each other. They're all, and then, the camera kind of pans over into like a side view, and Strickland just turns around and moves some people out of the way and just jumps over the row and starts attacking Duplessis, and they're hitting each other. And it almost, it seems staged to me, you know. They waited till the camera was in the right position to film it, and then that's when it went off.
Oh,
And even
maybe
Dana White said, it's my fault they were sitting by each other. I missed it. Come on.
yeah, it had some elements being controlled, and the UFC, I think, is at that level now.
Yeah,
You know
I
what I
do
mean?
too.
It's like when me and you talk about like the Super Bowl halftime show. The Super Bowl, the artist comes out and they start their music and stuff, and instantly there's like an audience of a couple of thousand people on the field jumping and stuff like that. Every one of those people is hired and choreographed. Thousands of people. So this is small time type of management for a sporting company to do this. And unfortunately, this is their history of how they build fights is, people insulting each other and bringing up, child abuse as a kid. Since when is that cool to, you were abused as a child? Ha ha. It's like Duplessis, maybe he doesn't have any class, but that's a low bell bar for, for class, to go beyond that. You know what I mean? And so Sean could have gotten worked up over it. Sean's not a guy that is going to hold down his emotions either, right? That's the portrayal of it. But yeah, I think this had its look like a work.
Yeah, it was weird. Like the camera was behind them, and that wouldn't have been a good shot. And then as soon as you get this nice kind of side angle, that's when it kind of began. It was almost like, okay, guys, now we can start. You know,
Yeah.
they
Or
may have
good
even
camera.
had they may have even had a voice piece in their ear or something telling them that. It just seemed kind of
And
weird.
it's a shame because I mean the bottom line is if you just use the reality of the situation, it could be it could be marketed as a great fight. You know, you've got Strickland, the blue collar, all American kind of, not truly all American, but kind of like that blue collar, like, gritty American against a white African, right? And a guy who's proud of, and who's also dedicated himself to this sport. So now, how much has the sport grown that you can get this monster, from the African continent? You know what I mean? And there have been a lot of athletes now that have been champions and stuff like that. MMA is being practiced in Africa. It's such an accomplishment that they don't even pause for, you know? I guess we'll have to wait for 2027 for the PFL to unveil African PFL for us to really reflect on that. But, now you got a white guy from Africa,
South
and
Africa, yeah.
yeah, of course. But here's the thing this is as diverse and as interesting a matchup of people from different walks of life as just focusing totally on reality as you can get. And they have to focus on, pee-pee jokes and making fun of your father and stuff like that. It's just, it could be so much more in terms of, just talking cultures. It's a great fight.
Now, in defense of PFL, UFC's been talking about Africa for a long time and never pulled it off. They were talking about that back when they had Adesanya and Usman and Ngannou as champions, and that was eons ago.
Yeah, if those three were champions, you should have headlined Lagos,
Yeah.
or one of the major. Nigeria is probably the big economy in the central parts of Africa. Not going to Egypt or something like that. So, and I present to you that doing business in Africa is not easy. It's not easy, and I have a friend who experienced going over to Africa and Nigeria as on a ship, on a merchant ship, and he came to customs, handed the guy his passport. His guy took his passport, walked into a back room, and came back out and asked him for his passport. He had to start bribing people immediately upon arrival. So it's not an easy place to do business. And if the UFC figured that out, I present to you that it's very likely the PFL will figure it out sometime between now and 2027.
I mean, Dana White brought this up in the press conference again, though. That's why I thought I wanted to bring it up. He talked about their goal is to build a PI in Nigeria and Rwanda, of all places, which I did not understand. Maybe he just made a mistake. What do you make of that?
Rwanda, after all their history of what they went through, which is, I think it's at the international level been labeled a genocide, whereas people argue it's not a genocide, it's theirs is legitimately agreed on by everybody that they went through a national trauma for a month or so that is beyond anything. But I think since then, the strong man there has a very stable country. And that really is what you would need, is stability, to know that your people are going to deliver. So maybe that's the reason for it. I don't know why they wouldn't do South Africa. Again, because, that's the other major economy besides Nigeria on the continent there.
Yeah, I thought they really blew it, because even if Adesanya lost to Strickland, that was the time to do Strickland or Adesanya versus Duplessis. Really, it was the time to do it when Duplessis beat Whitaker.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they dropped it. I know Duplessis turned the fight down. They should have waited anyway. To fight anybody else other than those two was a mistake. And even if Strickland beat Adesanya, who cares? Do the fight then.
It depends how you look at it, because
they blew it.
Because I don't know how the UFC feels about having, at the end of the day, Nigeria and South Africa are the biggest economies on the African continent. But isn't it better to just have an American champion? You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, for the bottom line. So yeah, I think here you get into an inkling of how much Dana really controls things, and how some of these, like, if there was a commission that dictated that needed to be the fight, then that was the fight
Oh, but he was talking
based
about
on,
going to South Africa with Duplessis. I was like, the fight to go there with was Adesanya versus Duplessis. There was nothing
yeah,
else.
yeah, yeah. That's the
You
thing.
blew
Yeah,
it. You already blew it. You let something else happen and you blew it.
they're making more money. I don't think I think going into Africa is going to be a certain amount of a labor of love for whatever
Right.
company decides to do it, because you have more opportunities to make money elsewhere.
Yep. That makes sense. So I wanted to kind of get into something. Well, we'll talk a little bit about before we get into the Ian Gary Chael thing that I wanted to talk about. But this is kind of interesting because last show we had talked about MVP being in the PFL smart cage, but Dana White brought up that Michael Venom Page is going to fight Kevin Holland at UFC 299. So what do you make of that? He just appeared at PFL, and just almost overnight, Dana White says, nope, we got him to fight Kevin Holland.
It's another example of the PFL is playing checkers and Dana's playing three-dimensional chess. Because is MVP the main event of that card?
No.
No, he's on the main card, so he's like the fourth fight up. That's
O'Malley versus Cheeto Vera be the main event.
that's perhaps the most important piece on the Bellator roster, going right into mid-range card for the UFC. Do you think that doesn't send a message? Do you think that MVP saying, I'm not staying with Bellator, I'm going to UFC, here's my signature so that Dana can announce it? I told you in the last podcast, there isn't a single fighter on the roster in Bellator or PFL that wouldn't go to UFC right now if all things were, available that way. And MVP is just another example. They gave him some money. Here's the interesting part, and maybe the PFL should take some notes. They signed MVP, and they announced when he's fighting and against who.
Right.
Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference for MVP and what he wants? All these guys want is to have an opponent and a date. And the PFL doesn't provide enough of that. So here they may have MVP, assuming here's what could happen is the PFL could sue to stop the fight if they feel they have some kind of contractual tied MVP. But if they had bought him in thinking we'll bring him in, we'll treat him nice, we'll put him in a hotel and stuff like that. And then when it comes down to it, they were like, well, we're thinking sometime in April, or, whatever was anything but an opponent and a date. They were already behind, they were already not winning that fight with MVP. The UFC had an opponent and a date, and the money was right. With PFL, it's like, yeah, they're promising money and this and that and the other stuff. But where's the opponent and the date? And this is a perfect example of why they're dropping the ball. They just lost perhaps the best male asset that they got from the Bellator roster to the UFC's main card. In other words, if MVP's fight gets canceled, the UFC will roll on. You know what I mean? There's nothing to it. Meanwhile, they just how does the PFL even respond to this? If it's a lawsuit, That may not be the best thing either. You know what I mean? It's like, first of all, I don't know if you can lawyer up all you want. I don't know if you want to go up against the UFC's lawyers, right? But let's say you're lawyered up equally. What's the PR advantage of saying, no, we want him to fight for us where he'll make less money and be less seen? So the PFL, again, like I present to you, it's like a lot of talk, a lot of talk. Bringing MVP, bringing Kayla and Cyborg and all the rhetoric you hear from the big fighters on that roster now is, we're waiting. We're waiting to see what you're going to do. So
Yeah, it would be the
MVP
same
wasn't going
problem
to win
Bjorn
it.
Rebney had with Eddie Alvarez. They would never be able to prove that they could match that contract. There's no way.
Yeah, no, if it's based on percentages or anything like that, yeah, no, they could look. He's got a couple of $100 million from Qatar. So whatever, he could say, hey, look, I'm going to pay MVP $5 million flat for the next fight and take him from the UFC. So they could do what they want, but is it smart for business? So here, MVP must have been in some level of being free, being able to sign a contract with the UFC. That the PFL can't just say, look, I got this one here that says, look at the dates. He's ours. That contract's null and void. So let's just say that the lawyers are smart enough that that's not the situation. MVP did have some options. The other part of it is, since he appeared in the PFL ring and they showed him, and Dana had mentioned him before that, Dana actually gave the PFL a couple of weeks to get something done.
Yep.
If there was anything they could do. So it's just, it goes to show the levels of difference between the two companies.
Yeah, they did have an opponent for him. They had Cedric Doumbé, but just
Yeah, yeah. As Cedric's
but
people,
no
how
date,
far?
no date, as you said, no date.
Yeah, no. I'll ask you this: call Cedric Doumbé and ask him, has he gotten a contract? Has he gotten the fight agreement, the second portion of the contract for the actual fight and stuff like that? Has dollars been discussed? Does he know where it's going to be? Anything like that? Has there even been a phone call? Or was it just like, yeah, we're in April, you know? And that's the embarrassing part of this. This is just, this to me is an embarrassment for the PFL. And a sign that if things continue to go this way, only the lawsuit could break the UFC, because the PFL won't. And the PFL in 20 years may be bigger, but they aren't closing the gap right now.
Now, I wanted to ask you about this Ian Gary situation. Now, for people watching this, it's kind of a long story, so I'm not going to tell the whole backstory. But I did talk to Miguel about this offline, so it kind of gave him the backstory of it. But his wife was kind of at the center of and him, for the sake of the story, that she had written a story back when, I would say, maybe when she was in her 20s or something, and the World Cup had been in the UK. And now she said it was more meant as a joke. And I know the UK has kind of, different humor than us by far. And, where it was kind of like meant to be like, maybe how you could acquire a soccer star as a husband or a boyfriend or whatever the case may be. And, some of these fighters, over time, as this had started to gain momentum, because it built up over time, had started to use this against Ian Gary. The fact that this had been done, and the fact that he had taken on her ex-husband's last name as part of his name, so he's Ian Machado Gary now, and that she's much older than him. I think she's like maybe 40 or so, and he's in his 20s. So they felt it was a little unusual, the circumstances, and they used that against him. as he was going to fight on this card as well, 296, and he ended up pulling out. He got flu, he got pneumonia, but it had built up into a pretty big controversy. He had kind of stayed away from the media leading up to the fight almost completely, and Chael Sonnen had kind of used that to his advantage to say that Ian Gary was all his PR was dumb and he was doing things the wrong way, and Ian Gary took it upon himself to say that who is Chael Sonnen to decide what is Chael. When did Chael Sonnen become this person that everyone should have to listen to and take advice from him what they need to do? So I wanted to bring this topic up too because to some extent I agree with him because I feel like Chael had to take on this moniker to some degree to make up for some of the shortcomings that he had as a fighter to some degree. And I wanted to get your take on this a little bit. Chael, and he's kind of become the star. He wears these new glasses that he's got, and it's like everyone wants to go to him to get his opinion on what a fighter's doing, and I don't understand it really. And I think some of the other fighters are starting to say that too.
Yeah, I saw Chael's new glasses, and I got to be honest with you. I paused for a moment when I saw him, and I thought for a brief second that it was the schmo. That it wasn't Chael, it was the schmo I was like, oh no, wait, that's Chael. So yeah, I think here's an interesting situation with Chael. Chael, no one can prevent people from making money, and Chael's figured out his way to make money. And a part of it is running his mouth in the way he does, and that suited him as a fighter and stuff. And now he wants to adopt the role of being. Look, the fact is the UFC doesn't have the sport doesn't have enough analysts and people doing a legitimate job. And here's the point, so Chael's decided to say, yeah, I'll do it. And he's got his own interests and his own things like that. He's not exactly a neutral party, and it's always going to reflect back on him. How do you compare to me, my greatness and stuff like that? So let him do what he wants to do. Chael's a guy that when he started out in the sport was against any of this type of talking and stuff like that. That was his normal nature. So I present to you every moment that he has spent trash talking and stuff like that is very contrived. That's all it is, So now he's going to give me his opinion, and yeah, his opinion holds some water, when he talks about peers and things like that and fights and stuff. But yeah, it comes with the fact that he paid a lot of dues as a wrestler. He paid a lot of dues fighting for $2,000 and less, and so now I wouldn't hold him back from everything he can make and stuff like that. But it doesn't mean that everything he says is correct. In this particular case with Ian Gary, and I'm an old guy, right? I'm in my 50s, so maybe he's in some kind of more, he's married to an older woman. This, she's maybe enjoys athletes or whatever. But it's exactly the same thing as Duplessis bringing up Sean Strickland's father beating him. Well, why does those types of personal, why make Ian Gary explain anything about his marriage in the public to anybody? And I've heard something, it's like he took the name and adopted kids and this and that. Why do we even know that? Why do we care? And in this case, it's because his opponent brought it up. There's a level of class that's missing to this sport that, is beyond me at this point, and Chael is suggesting to Ian that he should use whatever controversy is going on. I don't know all the details because I don't care now we're into personal. I don't care. It has nothing to do with it. And what you're actually doing is you're messing with Ian's head enough that it could have an effect on the fight, on his next fight. And I'm against anything that has that. You know what I mean? So it's like, let's clean this family shit up. It's just not. It's counterproductive. But what Chael is suggesting is that Ian should jump on the situation and make it into like an attention getter. You know, take his wife's book and leave it on the desk, or you know, it's like, oh, you know, Chael, that's what you would do. You know, and though you've gotten, you know, this notoriety as being the best trash talker in MMA and stuff like that, you know, we all know about Doug Crosby and your scripting and some of the, you know, the truth is it's kind of average. You know what I mean? It's become a lot of, like I said before, pee jokes, and you know, your mother and your father and your kids, and you know, at the end of the day, like I said, I would be more into like a flag waving USA versus South Africa presentation on it, but that never sold in, you know, in the sport anymore, you know, except at the World Cup level. But you know, we there were many early Russia versus USA shows and USA versus the world, and you know, this and the other. They never sell. So I'm the fool, I guess. But there's an element of lacking class in all of this stuff, and Chael is at the forefront of that to me. You know, at this point, he looks for something classless to make some noise over it. I mean, there's so much more. He knows it too.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing that I always felt with Chael was all the talk in the world, and he did. He got himself into a lot of big fights by doing that, but he never really addressed the elephant in the room, which was that he had a limited skill set, and for whatever reason, you know, most wrestlers don't, but he did. He had a little bit of quit in him. A lot of those big moments he gave up in. At the first sign of trouble, he kind of folded, and he never addressed those issues. So that every time he got talked himself into a big fight, those things were still there to hold him back.
Yeah, you know, I don't know what is the single greatest UFC fight of all time.
You know, it's a tough thing to say. I think everyone has kind of their own opinions of why. You know, there's always kind of different
Yeah, you know,
factors, I
I'm a
think.
fan of Anderson versus Hess, but I digress. You know, in the argument somewhere,
Oh, Andy
Chael,
Anderson versus John Hess.
yeah,
Yeah,
a classic if ever there was one. You know what
yeah,
I mean? But I think Chael against Anderson has to qualify as one of those fights, the first one,
yeah.
and you are nothing but a special athlete to have created that moment. So, you know, limited skill set aside, I think the guy, when he was on, was an elite top shelf guy. And just, or maybe just below the top shelf, in that he never did break into the title picture or anything like that. So, but he was an opponent that could be dangerous to anybody if he was right. And I think the thing is Chael is a complicated guy. I think, how do you make it right for him? I think, um, you know, there are performances he had coming up and stuff like that that hint at what you were saying, where, you know, maybe he didn't give his all or 100% like that. But I think to you, he's contrived enough that, hey, you got your $2,000 worth.
Right.
That's what he was being paid for. So he got that. You know, he tapped out early, or you know, the armbar wasn't fully extended and he's out of there, or whatever that situation is. I think Chael was playing it at that level where it's like, yeah, you know, is it worth it? And once you're in the Anderson Silva fight, I heard he made almost $5 million for that.
But it
So
kind of
now,
summed up Chael. That fight summed up Chael. He gave all this effort, and he was just a few seconds. How many seconds away from being champion? And he, one, got caught, and two, gave up. It's almost like Charlie Brown running to kick the football. He's about to kick it, and Lucy pulls it away, and he goes flying. That's what
yeah, I
happened to
mean,
Chael. You
that's
know?
that's the story of his career
Yeah,
in
it is.
terms of, yeah, I think it's inescapable that he was on the cusp
Yep.
and didn't get there. And he'll see, and again, because he does what he does now very contrived. He'll tell you he beat Anderson Silva. He won every minute of that fight.
Yeah,
And he's
that's what
got
he
his
has to
ways,
say. That's what I'm saying. A lot of
and
things
that
he says
yeah.
are to cover up the fact that he
And here's the
wasn't.
part: is
Yeah,
he won't come on to a forum like this where I'll take him on. I'll
yeah,
talk to him. I'll take him on. You
yeah.
know what I mean? It doesn't, because you can't escape that fact that he didn't break through. And I can talk about Chael in such a way that I'll tell the public here. Chael was fighting for 2000. And I will still argue, if you look at Chael's career, maybe the best span he had was the 4 fights he did for Bodog when I gave him a raise to 4 fights, $25,000 each. And he points to that contract as a contract that kept him in MMA. Because if he's making 2,000, he would have had to go do real estate or whatever else, he was going to get in trouble for elsewhere. So I have a deep respect for Chael. And when he was coming up, I thought that physically he was an impressive talent. But you couldn't get a word out of him. He wouldn't do press. He wouldn't do any of that stuff. The Chael you see now is a very planned and contrived element. But I think, yeah, at the end of the day, those were his 4 best fights, and then he made millions for the Silva fight, so he gave his all and lost to an all-time great. So, I don't want to discredit Chael so much in that one as I would like to. That may be Anderson Silva's best win.
Oh, he beat some very good fighters. He beat Yushin Okami, he beat Nate Marquardt, he beat a lot of good fighters. I'm not saying that, but I would
Yeah,
say in the
I mean,
biggest moments,
if you look at it, he beat Gumbarian and Suluev,
yeah,
both of them for Bodog in those early fights. And whereas the first guy he fought, and I think he won a decision, I think he won a decision. And the second fight went pretty much the same way, but he finished it. So he was checking off a lot of boxes early on in his career, but not giving you anything on the PR end. And when he got the PR side is when he blew up and made money. So it's hard to argue it. But I do tell you that deep down inside, he knows he sold out a little bit.
yeah, he beat Paulo Filo when he was very, very good at that time, you know. But at the
Hey,
biggest moments, the 2 fights with Anderson Silva, the fight with John Jones, he did beat Michael Bisping, you know, the fight with Tito that he shouldn't have lost, you know, the fight with Fedor.
his fight
Yeah, there's a
with
lot of fights.
Tito, that's pro wrestling. That's not a fight.
You think so? You think he did a work?
No, I don't think it was a true work, but
Oh,
I don't think it was. At the end of the day, the expectation is that this is, combat. So, the Vanderlei Silva attitude of I am coming to kill my opponent does carry a lot of weight. And I don't think either Tito and Chael, for all their talking in the press conferences, weren't even close to trying to kill each other.
yeah. Oh, you think they just kind of went out there and went through the motion?
70%.
Oh,
Just my feeling. Look, I go back into old history and stuff like that. I'll tell you a boxing story, okay? Um, there's I'm gonna forget his name. I'll try to remember his name, but he was known. He fought from bantamweight to heavyweight, and he fought like 200 fight. Willie Meehan is his name, I think. I'll correct myself in the notes or whatever, but Willie Meehan fought at the turn of the century, and this guy was asked at one point in an interview, "Who's going to win between Jack Dempsey and Tommy Burns?" And the bottom line was he had fought both. So now his opinion really carries some weight. And he fought Dempsey a few times, actually beat Dempsey one time in a 4-rounder. And then when he fought Tommy Burns, his exact words or paraphrasing was, yeah, we went into the 3rd or 4th round and I had a fight next week and I'd given the promoter enough. So he didn't come out for the next round. There's a professionalism, there's a level of professionalism in there in the fight game where, yeah, he made it look good. The crowd was satisfied. He felt okay, but he didn't give his all. He wasn't in there a fight to the death. The interesting part about Willie Meehan is he says that Jack Dempsey hit him with a liver shot that he felt 2 years later. So when he had to, he was definitely a serious guy. But yeah, when he was being paid in Pittsburgh to fight Burns, and you know, and it was an average fight on his calendar because he fought a couple of times every month. He got to the point where he said, I gave it my all. And I present to you that's a lot what happens with Chael, too. Chael knows what it is to give his all and fight to the death. And, you know, you're right that against John Jones and some of the other performances, that's not the Chael. That's not the attitude he was entering the fight ring with.
Why do you think he's becomes kind of this? Is it
There's
just
no one
because
else.
is it just because of his YouTube channel, or how do you think he's become the guy where, for some reason, maybe it's because the media did it, but he's in
Yeah,
this position where he feels like he's the person to tell everybody else what they should be doing.
he's only extending his career. He has no other choice than to keep it going, right? If he's getting, you know, if you're making a couple, 5 figures a month from your YouTube channel, you don't want that to go away, and from the fighter, high point and stuff to transition into what he's doing now, which is more, and he's done talk show versions and things like that. Now he really is more TMZ kind of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah, he's just trying to make his money. And I don't knock him for that. There's no one else that can really compete with him in terms of, you got the UFC. The thing is he's smart enough to not completely crap on the UFC or break bad on them.
Right.
But he's not as much of a prostitute, for lack of a better word, than Daniel Cormier or Michael Bisping or one of the guys that actually works for the UFC, Joe Rogan, where those guys have to give you the company line. There's no choice. They can't really express, Joe on his podcast might say, give Fedor props, or something like that, but he doesn't break bad on the UFC. Those guys are, so Chael has this image of, being exempt from the UFC's influence. And I present to you that in a very contrived way, he is influenced by them because he doesn't want to, he doesn't want them mad at him. Right now, they let him operate. And he's the only guy. He's the only guy, with the chops of a fighter, too. Ariel Helwani. The MMA media is so poor that, yeah, all it would take is for a couple of real people to step up and Chael be forgotten, Right now, like I said, I confused him with the schmo. He's actually trying to he's in new territory. He's in new territory for where he was when, he showed up in Atlantic City for a fight against a Russian guy.
Yeah, you've done a lot of business with him,
Yeah, yeah, and I like him. I like him. And you know what? The fact that he's got, hopefully $1 million in the bank, I know he does because, like I said, he's not a lifestyle guy and stuff like that. I think he deserves it. I think he deserves it for the dues he paid early and for the change he made and stuff like that because he showed some versatility and stuff. But I know him enough that I don't think that the Chael we see in public now is the genuine Chael. I think it's an act. And yeah, more power to him. Keep grabbing that money, baby.
Well, as always, I appreciate you taking time to give your insight, and I want to give you a chance to kind of tell people what you're doing with the dog rescue as we close out.
Just same old business as usual. We're getting ready for the holidays here, so um, we're trying to do something special for the dogs and get them all out on trips and things like that, and scheduling a few things like that. And it's hard because it's a small country and stuff, so that's taking up my time and regular job and things like that. So just gonna enjoy having a week off here at the end of the month.
Yeah, and it's always great to talk to you, and I hope you have a great holiday, and everybody
Oh, we'll
checking
talk
this
before
out.
then. Come on, man. We'll talk before
Yeah,
then.
yeah, for sure. And everybody checking this out as always. Appreciate you supporting the episodes, and be sure to check the show notes if you want to donate to Miguel's dog rescue.
And let me tell you, my website, and thanks to Todd, we did an interview with John Peretti. I put up on my website as well as Todd's. And that's the kind of stuff that still motivates me in MMA and stuff because John mentioned in the interview that he had been actually photoshopped out of pictures by the UFC. And that's just, you know, John is a Mount Rushmore type of guy for this sport. Absolutely. And that interview to me was more meaningful than any of this other stuff about talking about, Chael or any of these other guys and stuff like that. Because, Peretti is a guy that we all owe a debt to, Chael included. And he would have liked Chael, I think, to a certain extent. He would have criticized him too, but John's a tough guy. But yeah, I think that interview deserves a lot more attention. So whether you go to it on Todd's site or my site, it's a must-see view because you're talking about, hey, he's a godfather, man.
Yeah, and you'll probably definitely see some more Peretti on, both of our stuff because Miguel's actually read his book, and so we'll be doing some more stuff with John
I
for sure.
ordered it. I ordered it the month it came out. You know what I mean? And it's like, and I know. Look, I was thinking about writing a book about a boxer named Ad Walgast from 1910. He was a lightweight champion in 1910. And I found and I made friends with a guy named Arnie Lang who wrote a book focused on Walgast's 45 round win over battling Nelson for the world championship back then. 45 rounds, guys. And I know that there's no money in books. There's just no money in books. So John's book was a labor of love. He didn't make any money off of it. But he did tell you a story from the soul. Very notably, Art Davie, when he wrote his book in corroboration with Sean Wheelock, they focused on just his UFC years, while John gave you his whole life. So I think John is absolutely the real deal in terms of everything he's done. He's got an unbelievably unique life, even without the fighting stuff. And you add the fighting stuff to it and his legitimacy and stuff. And, Color Me, he's the godfather. He's the godfather.
Yeah, and I look forward to doing more with him. He sent me a message saying that we're really one of the only people that have the backbone to still be doing stuff with him. And which is a shame. But
It's
I'm glad
incredible
that
to
he
me.
says that to us. But it's a shame that there's no one else out there. I think he should be on.
That's what's unbelievable, and he does, you know, I think you could see in the interview that he's still uncompromising. You know what I mean? It's not like he's an easy guy to deal with and stuff like that. And I'd like to get in the future into some of, you know, does he regret that uncompromising nature may have been, at the core of what's holding him back? The breakup in New York where you couldn't run events in New York, and Meyerowitz maybe holding that against him, even though Meyerowitz hired him afterwards. But then during his whole tenure there, him being very uncompromising, Meyerowitz just reinforced that I'm not going to sell the UFC to this guy. And that's a shame. That's a shame. This would be a completely different sport if he was in charge of it. And it would definitely be more interesting. It would definitely not be the homogenized, I don't know, off the shelf type of version of the UFC that we have now, where, Paddy Pimblett is on the main card.
Well, they may have ended up buying it eventually anyway. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Money trumps all, and the Fertittas had it, but they had the passion. They wanted in, and they boxed Peretti out, and the fact that includes taking him out of the real history and stuff. I mean, the guy definitely was the first to do so many things in this sport that, he shouldn't be forgotten. He's a genius.
What's amazing, though, is the fact that Bob Merowitz wasn't going to sell that to him. Really came out of me talking to James Wormy, because John Peretti had no idea about that.
Right. And the thing is that, he's going to be the last to find out. You know what I mean? I don't think he realizes. I think he thinks he's being honest, and I don't think he realizes that to the average person that he hasn't maybe won over the 100% respect, that he comes across as bullish, as hard to deal with. I was at the UFC in Brazil, and I witnessed this in the lobby of the Holiday Inn in São Paulo, that Carlos Barreto, a Brazilian black belt, and actually I believe he's the first Brazilian black belt in the modern era to wear a blue gi at the World Championships. And he was older, and at the time, so he was a respected figure and a huge guy, a heavyweight. And Barreto wanted in the UFC. And I'm not sure what fight of his Peretti had seen and stuff, but Peretti sat him down, and Peretti says that he respects fighters and that sort of stuff. But he almost treated Peretti like Barreto like a non-fighter. He told, you suck. You did, things like that were the type of language he used. And I think that's that part of uncompromising. That's what he thought. But yeah, I present to you that he would have gotten a lot further if he had been able to somehow get a handle on that. You know what I mean? And not be so public with it, because I think that most people remember him that way without giving him credit for what he actually did, which was, he was the point man. Like in Vietnam, the point guy was the guy 10 meters ahead, with a gun all by himself. That's him in MMA. And he won't get credit for it, mainly because of his personality, I think. And that's, I don't think that's right.
Yeah. We'll see more with him, I'm sure, and hopefully something will come out of it. I think that's what I hope, is that it'll draw more attention to him.
Even if we could spread the word a little bit more about him, because if you're talking about I'm in the MMA museum on the page and stuff like that, he is a first ballot Hall of Famer, and the UFC doesn't even have him in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
He's a first ballot MMA Hall of Famer, absolutely, without a doubt. And maybe the most important non-competitor.
Same with Frank Shamrock.
Yeah, well, Frank's a competitor,
right, but he's a Frank first ballot, and he's not in the Hall of Fame either.
He's not in the UFC Hall of Fame, and you're absolutely right. And to a certain extent, both those guys come from the same era.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the UFC doesn't like, that there was something there before him.
Like I said, I always felt Frank was the first greatest fighter of all time that we saw, the first one.
I could take you back like a year before Rumi Sato started his rise, and I'm just a Sato fan.
Yeah.
But I think you're right there, and I think the word you're reaching for is when Frank showed up. That's when the idea, the concept of pound for pound
Right.
became something. Before that, it was like, Hoist is the best or whatever. But now you're starting to really isolate sport and pound for pound and things like that. Now you're adding sophistication. That's what Frank Shamrock did. And I argue Sato and the Shudo guys were maybe a year ahead of him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Miguel, it's always great talking to you. I mean,
Is
what?
anybody listening at this point? Anybody? Do we have
Well,
fans?
it's not live, but yeah, they'll be watching it. They always watch our episodes on these, and it's always great to have your insight. I know the fans appreciate it. I see the comments, and all the people who support us, we appreciate it, and make sure to subscribe, share it with people, comment. We always like to see your feedback, and until next time, we always appreciate it, and take care.